Ladies and gentlemen, we were saying that Freud began to develop then a topographic model of the mental apparatus, starting with 1897, but actually in that regard, the most important work first, See the Daylight, was the interpretation of dreams in 1900. Okay? Then followed by important works. Let me enumerate a few important works which I do recommend you to read. It may be quite an interesting experience. In 1905, he published another important booklet, perhaps, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality. Okay? And in 1913, there comes, from a sociological point of view, having a significance, certain significance, is Totem and Taboo, okay, where he discusses the first possibility of forming a society, human society, okay, not family, headed by a patriarch, dominating all the rest, a society of equals, I mean, okay, the possibility of developing a society of equals by parricide, by the act of parricide committed by the sons of the father. In other words, through killing their father, the sons come to establish a society of equals among themselves with their certain regulations, therefore developing the incest taboo in the meantime. Okay? And in 1920, there comes Beyond the Pleasure Principle, which is another very important book in its own right. Okay? And 1 year later, in 1921, which may be much more interesting for us, there comes Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, which discusses the relationship of the formation of the ego and ego's self-identification with the group, okay? And in 1923, of course, perhaps by its own self, most important booklet again, The Ego and the Id, which marks another transformation in Freudian thinking, actually. From then on, he will pass to develop what he would call the structural model, okay? For instance, the latest commentary that I read to you from Freud belongs to that later period where he already developed the theory of Oedipus complex and its connection, in this connection, the theory of the 3 components of the mental structure. Okay, now I say structure, no longer topographical model. The ego, superego, and id. Okay. But before that, we are going to take a look at the topographical model, and Lacan, actually, Jacques Lacan, later on claiming himself to be a loyal follower of Freud, would emphasize these earlier periods rather than the last structural model. Okay? And there, in this topographical model, what we see is the components of the mental apparatus. First of all, a consciousness, of course. Okay? And it would not be the same as the book represents it, but yeah, what I'm going to draw as my illustration of this topographical model. Okay, a consciousness here sitting on a throne. Actually, I resemble it to the courtroom of the king. Okay, king himself sitting or being at the center of the courtroom, okay? The courtroom generally we may call as consciousness, but actually what falls into consciousness is a matter of attention, okay? So, yeah, there may be many elements, many components in the room Freud depicts as consciousness here. But what is really conscious are those items upon which the attention of the consciousness falls. Okay? So, for instance, I may see many things here in this room, but only occasionally see particular things. Okay? For instance, it's for the first time I'm looking at directly the camera. Okay? Well, I know that the camera was there from the very beginning, but the first time it takes my spatial attention notice on it. Okay? Then there turns out to be totally conscious something. Well, and he imagines as well a door, an entrance door to this room, which connects that room with a perhaps larger room, which he depicts as the unconscious. Okay, which is full of drives and instincts, struggling to come out of this room and enter into the room of the consciousness. Okay, but in between, at the door, there is a doorkeeper, which Freud interprets as the preconscious, which censors and filters and decides which drives and instincts may enter into the room of consciousness, into the room where consciousness is, if you like. Okay? So it functions as a checking mechanism, a censoring mechanism for all these drives and whatever they are. Drives and what? Instincts, right. Drives and instincts. So drives and instincts are here, sometimes struggling to come out from the darkness. From the darkness, of course, we may not know whether it is dark or not. It is dark from the point of view of the consciousness, which means that consciousness does not see them. Okay? Is not aware of them. And even their entrance is not enough for them to be conscious. For them to be conscious, it is required that consciousness attention falls upon them. Okay? Otherwise, they may be in the room, in the crowd of many other things, but if your consciousness attention would never fall upon them, you will never notice their existence in the room. Just like a king in courtroom, making no notice of who is entering and who is going out. Only some significant persona draws his attention, okay, and he attends them, he talks with them, he greets them, etc. But the others he does not give a shit about, okay? So he resembles this situation, and as you can see, this room, from the point of view of consciousness, reigning consciousness at least, remains in the dark. Okay? Now here, some ideas, some instincts or drives, some energy, libido, sexual energy. Actually, libido, yeah, he first defines libido as energy and resembles it to electricity. Okay? And actually, the resemblance, the analogy goes even further than this, simply because this energy, sexual energy, has a tendency to accumulate, or if you like to use the electrical terminology, physical terminology, charges. It charges, okay? And therefore, it demands, while it sits charging itself, okay, it demands discharge, okay? Now, it is this discharge, actually, which causes the symptoms, etc., okay? This unavoidable discharge of the accumulated sexual energy, if you like, okay? Showing itself in the form of sometimes bursts, therefore disrupting the smooth-going life of the suffering individual, etc., okay? So they enter into these sometimes in the form of symptoms, and the attention of the consciousness may fall upon them as if they are something problematic, demanding a resolution. You know? In such situations, when the symptoms turn out to be that effectual and powerful that the human being can no longer pursue a smooth operating life, they come to ask help. Okay? So it is this topographical model constituted of three basic components. Well, later on, Freud, under the observations coming out of clinical experience, did come to recognize that there are some inconsistencies and some points which rather falls weak for explanation of the new incoming data from observation. Okay? So he had certain modifications in the system for a while, adding a theory of narcissism, for instance, into the picture, etc. But later on, finally, at about somewhere in 1923, he decides to make a major change in the overall system. Okay? And then we begin to talk about the development of the structural model, okay, rather than the topographical model. Now, this is called topographical simply because the components are set against each other in a geographical relationship, in a spatial relationship, okay? So they are, the components of the mental apparatus are depicted here as if they are distributed in space, okay? Spatially differentiated from each other, okay? These are there, those are here, etc. Okay? In later structural model, though, however, it's no longer that spatial relationship that predominates, but rather a little bit complex one, okay? The components of which are structurally no longer spatially related with each other, okay? Now, in that structural model, you'll find, again, three components. I'm going to read certain extracts from his writings, but before that, let me draw the picture, okay? Three components. Let's assume that at the center of which there you're going to find what's called the ego, okay? I'm putting this in parentheses simply because in Freud and later followers, there is a huge deal of discussion with regard to the status or whatness or internal organization of the ego, etc., etc., okay? But the ego, for the time being at least, let's assume that the ego stands at the center. It is not the core of the things, though, okay? At the core of the things, or at the core of the human mental apparatus, is what he calls the id. Actually, the ego in German, ich. I do not know why the English prefer to translate it as the ego, okay? Actually, it translates as I, the ego, we say, okay? So the id actually in German, S, which translates as it, if you like, the it, okay? It's nothing other than this. To be able to avoid from any confusion with the usual ordinary pronoun it, the British prefer to translate as German as it, okay? So it's nothing special there, okay? When I say id rather than it shows itself as if something very special. Actually, this it does not refer anything else than that it which I refer when I speak my internal innermost core, okay? Yeah, and beneath all the layers of my sociability, beneath all the layers of my human being, social human being, when I try to refer that something resides at the core of me, okay, I'm going to use this term it, okay? It is it which forces me to do so. It's it which forces me to develop sexual desires. It's it which forces me to develop passions, okay? Actually, all the other forces actually trying to help me, what me is here, the ego, trying to help me to control those powerful urges coming from it, okay? Otherwise, I would be a very aggressive person, ready to discharge all my sexual energy onto everything that I come across, okay? So I restrict myself under the pressure of the other forces, okay? So it remains innermost, therefore, okay? It remains innermost and therefore at the dark from the point of view of the consciousness. You'll see, consciousness would not like to recognize the powerful forces operating in the it, okay? And we are going to discuss why it does not like. Actually, the very status of ego in the Freudian psychoanalysis may explain something to you, okay? Now, as the third component, at the outermost of the psychic apparatus, if you like, okay, now we are going to talk about the formation of a superego. Now, the interesting point is this: from two ends, actually, from the upper end and the bottom end, what the psychic apparatus or mental apparatus faces or borders upon is nothing else than the outside external world, okay? So this something you may call, you may see it as surrounded by the external world, okay? But their relationship, the relationship of superego and the relationship of id with the surrounding external world are quite different from each other. First of all, the id or it is connected with the external world. Why? Simply because it is right coming out of there. It is coming out of my biological nature, my biological existence, okay? Which is an externality in relation to my consciousness, okay? It's an external, part of the external, my biological existence, okay? My innermost animal nature, I am talking about, okay? On the other hand, however, on the other end of the continuum, we will find the superego, the formation of the superego. The superego is not there, okay? It's formed through the processes of socialization, internalization, etc. And the difference is that by being born with a charge of energy, okay? So this charge of energy is contained in the it, okay? By being born, this means that the it is there, okay? Therefore, the child can never be innocent victim of the seduction coming from the environment, okay? Simply because it has already been charged with the energy. On the other hand, however, the development of superego is a later phenomenon as a result of the process of what we sociologists like to call as internal socialization, okay? In other words, the individuals coming to learn the rules and expectations of the external world, okay? If you like, you can also describe superego as the formation of a certain ego in accord with the expectations and demands of the social, okay? And now, in between, in the process of the development of superego, we come across with the phenomenon of the id in its development as well. It is not there from the very beginning as well. It's something, again, developed through the interaction of the id and the superego. Okay. Actually, Freud would describe the position of the ego as a very difficult position, okay? Simply because it is the ego, according to him, which tries to check and tries to establish a balance between the extremities of demands coming both from the id and the superego, external world, okay? Therefore, the ego is squeezed down, okay? within the pressures coming from both sides. There is a very beautiful quotation here in the text. With regard to it, he says that it's the dark, inaccessible part of our personality, a chaos, a cauldron full of seething excitations. It's filled with energy reaching it from the instincts, but it has no organization, produces no collective will, but only a striving to bring about the satisfaction of the instinctual needs, subject to the observance of the pleasure principle. As for the ego, however, now I'm quoting from Ispister, the author, the ego, which had been an idea that had long hovered along uneasily within his topographical model, came to be seen as that part of the mind, that part of the id, which under pressure, so the ego develops out of the id, okay, which under pressure from the outside world began to differentiate, to control the temptatious id. Gone are the static pictures of entrance halls and drawing rooms. The chaos of the id requires some more dynamic control. Now I'm quoting from, or author quotes from Freud once again, in connection with ego. The ego's relation to the id might be compared with that of a rider to his horse. The horse supplies the locomotive energy, while the rider has the privilege of deciding on the goal and of guiding the powerful animal's movements. But only too often there arises between the ego and the id the not precisely ideal situation of the rider being obliged to guide the horse along the path by which it itself wants to go. Okay? The ego, and again the author I am quoting, last time this quotation about superego, the ego has an even rougher time for another portion of the id became differentiated to form the superego. So superego again differentiates itself from the id again, okay? In its relationship with the external world. This is the heir to the Oedipus complex in the topographical system. Using energy derived from the id, it acts as a conscience, constantly castigating the ego, constantly castigating the ego for failing to control the id. Okay? So, therefore, the ego comes to be formed under these double pressures. But before that, this quotation reminds me something else. Okay, we haven't talked about the Oedipus, famous Oedipus complex. Okay, do you know the story of Oedipus? It's a beautiful story. I like it very much. So it means that I may have a problem as well. The Oedipus complex. Now, first premise. Okay, let's start with this. The first premise. Primarily belonging to the topographical model, though, don't forget, okay? Not to the structural model. That which later on would develop into the idea of id, now here described as the libido, primarily referring to the sexual energies. In the living being, okay? Now, these energies may divide themselves into two forms primarily, which according to Freud can be understood as life instinct and death instinct as well. But since a discussion of this will complicate the matter, we are not going into a detailed analysis of this, okay? So, sexual energies. Sexual energies are there from birth. And according to I don't know whether all of the psychologists or observants of the child development do agree on this, but Freud's understanding of the matter is this. Okay, sexual energies began to arouse in the child at a very early age. Okay, at a very really early month, 4, 6 months, etc. Okay, when the child is at the age of 4 or 6 months, sexual energies began to arouse in the child, and the child begins to develop certain attachments to the parents. Okay. Now, this attachment, don't forget, even though when you are looking at the face of the innocent face of the child, okay, may seem free from sexual interests, but what Freud would insist here that they are directly generated from those sexual instincts, sexual energies. Okay? So the child develops a certain interest. Now here in our case, in the case of the Oedipal complex, what are we talking about? Is a boy child. Freud has been criticized for this, that he did not pay much attention to the problem of the development of personality in girl children. Okay. So what are we talking about here? Is an actually usual family triangle of love. Okay. You know, for us to be able to have a children, there gotta be a suppose. Okay, a man, if you like, husband. Let's talk about talk with legal terms. Husband and a wife, a man and a woman. Okay, assuming that they are married, you know, as it was appropriate for Freud's own time. Okay, it was the close of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, and actually the social location was the bourgeois family, and roughly corresponding to bourgeois family, but in German bourgeois says a little bit more than bourgeois. Okay, bourgeois family means what we have here in our hands, true and true, not the capitalist, but true and true a family belonging to the city life. Okay. So husband and wife, therefore you can easily understand that probably a merchant family, okay, in German cities. Husband as being a merchant, of course breadwinner. Okay, therefore it's a patriarchal family, and therefore head of the family as well is the husband, male. I am head of the family. Therefore, I am the phallus here, okay, nobody else in this triangle. I cannot come to accept any possibility of any other phalluses over there, however they may be minor than in comparison to mine. And we have here the boy child. A child is born to our happy family, happily married family, okay? And of course, parents are quite happy, etc., celebrating their firstborn. But there's a problem. The introduction of the child into the earlier well-organized family life causes a disturbance. Okay? At least the child cries, continuously demanding attention, and sometimes crying to be bad with the mother. What I'm gonna do right now, okay? Mother wants to pay considerable attention, devotes larger part of her time for taking care of children, etc. And as father, as head of the family, here, as the center of all these union, okay, I'm put aside. I don't like this situation. Okay? I hate this. Even though I do not hate my child, okay, I hate this situation. And if I leave them by their own, they would happily ever after develop their attachments with each other. The mother is happy of taking care of her children, and the boy is happy being taken care of by the mother. Okay? But my order, my system of relationships, familial relationships, has been disturbed. Occasionally, I'm even forced to go outside of my sleeping room and find some place else where I can put my ass on. okay? So it's quite disturbing. I cannot even sleep in my bed. And my bed is my kingdom, okay? So, therefore, in this non-problematically growing and intensifying relationship of attachment between the child and the mother is increasingly turning out to be disruptive and disturbative for me, okay? And then I introduce into the picture by bringing rules, okay? No, the child has to sleep in the other room. No, the child should be taken care of at determined, predetermined periods of the day, etc. And I bring into the picture certain rules, powerful rules, which cannot be denied neither by the mother nor by the child, okay? And forcing them to put a check, a certain limit on their developing relationship of attachment, okay? This is the power of the phallus, okay? So, the mother, we are not going to talk about the mother here, okay? But Freud concentrates on what kinds of feelings the child develops here and how he tries to manage to give a certain directionality to his sexual energy, okay? Now, before the intervention of the father, as you can see, the sexual energies of the boy child has not been checked by any force at all, okay? The mother was happy to receive them all, and the child was happy to give them all, okay? To invest his sexual energy on the mother. Don't forget, this is not a neutral, simple emotional relationship. What we are talking about here, sexual attachment, development of the sexual attachment between mother and the father, the child, sorry, okay? So in other words, if I put it in adult terms, they turn out to be in love with each other, okay? And sexuality is involved, not excluded. Don't forget this as well, okay? It is not a, how are we going to put it? Not an innocent relationship of love between a boy, innocent boy child, and unawares female mother, okay? Rather, it's a true and true sexual relationship expressed in another terms, okay? Now, the boy child facing the interference of the father and recognizing its power on its own life, okay, would develop several alternative strategies as well here, okay? First of all, it may insist, the boy child may insist on his attachment with the mother, okay, and try to ignore the power of the father, or if you like, the power of the phallus. Okay, this is nothing about forgetting or not taking into consideration what Freud would call the castration anxiety. Okay. You know, this is the anxiety I like most, castration anxiety. Okay, it's the most powerful one. As far as I can see. Oh my God. The child may ignore the risks of castration, if you like. In other terms, may not fall into this anxiety of being castrated by the father. Actually, this is castration here, starting with the limitations brought about on your desires. Okay? It no longer means that your having desires may license you to realize them. Okay? This is the first experience of castration, actually. Okay? That you have desires, but somebody else, who is powerful than you, may not recognize the legitimacy of those desires and does not allow you to actualize, to realize those desires. Okay? And if you fall short of, while at the same time having this feeling, the strength, urge of the desire, on the other hand, you are falling short of realizing them. This is what castration means in the symbolic sense. Okay? Actually, you have been castrated, for instance, when you are sent to military service. Okay? Or when you start to work for somebody else, you have been experiencing another incarnation of that very same process of castration. Okay? You are no longer feel free to realize what you desire, what you demand. Okay? That's it. Of course, in extreme cases, this can lead to actual real castration as well. Okay? Another important point here, castration means here the loss of the phallus. What is loss of the phallus? Okay, having a certain sexual organ on the one hand, but on the other hand, here in that happy triangle of law, it represents power. Okay? It stands there for power. Power to be exercised. Power to decide how the love relationships in this triangle are going to be organized. Okay? It is that power. Or with the extension of it, it is that power that decides how this classroom will be organized. Okay? It is that power that decides how a wife should act to a husband. That decides how a child should face his or her father. Okay? So it means it's not only that sexual organ here, okay? It symbolizes that actual real power of deciding and imposing the decision onto the others. Okay? So in the first instance, when the child prefers to ignore that danger of losing that power, in other words, okay, what we will have an unleashed development of the attachment with the mother, okay, which can extend itself to having incestuous relationships with the mother on the one hand, or if that was not possible, may direct itself to the problem of identification with the mother again. Okay? So if I do not have an incestuous relationship with my mother, then I may prefer to identify myself with her, okay, and try to replace her in her relationship with my father. Okay? However, in most of the cases, usual cases, so to speak, okay, the child comes to recognize the threat generated by the existence of the father there, and out of the developed castration anxiety, okay, comes to identify, recognize the power of the father, and in his recognition tries to identify himself with the father. Therefore, we will have in such a case a child trying to reproduce the father model in his own generation. Okay? Actually, if the society is based upon this model, as long as if the society generates such a family model where father is the patriarch and mother is his sexual suppose, and they are having a child, okay, who are expected to obey the father, and in his obedience try to reproduce the father model in himself, okay, this is you can say that this is the ideal model in such societies, okay, which in other terms it means that such a child would not generate, perhaps expectantly, if there are no other causes, would not generate any psychic symptoms, okay. He simply would reproduce his father for the next generation. Okay? But this can only be possible, as you can see, as long and as much as the child develops that castration anxiety and recognizes it. Of course, there may be several complications in this process. The child may come to obey the power of the father, but though may remain negative with respect to its recognition. Okay? So you may have several problems out of this. But the general triangle and the story of the triangle is this. And this is the story of the development of, if you like, modern, early 20th century development of bourgeois psyche. Okay? So, even though we should confess that Freud presented this as a universal model, okay? And here, as you can see, the development of castration anxiety helps the child to come to a reconciliation with the external power, external superior power, out of which he would develop in his later model the idea of superego, as you see. Okay? So it is through this castration anxiety, actually having been already castrated, if you yield before the power, you've already been castrated. Okay? Actually, there is no question of, if you ask me, it's not a question of anxiety any longer. You have come to a reconciliation with that fact and develop the expectant personality. Expectant by whom? By the society, by the others. Okay? Expectant personality. Now, what kind of expectant? Having the cognizance of the existence of superior powers, for instance, in the external world, which as an individual, I myself, cannot overcome. Therefore, by recognizing their superiority, now I come to this reminds me something else. This reminds me the Nietzschean concept of the reactive forces operating through negative will. I come to recognize the existence of superior powers, and now I am trying to develop strategies to cope with them, to be able to survive in life. This is actually what we all are doing, isn't it? And according to Nietzschean terminology, as you may remember, this falls exactly into the category of the operation of the reactive forces in connection with the negative will. What is negated here is the real desire, my instincts, my libido. What is castrated in Freudian terminology is exactly this libido, okay? Castrated in the face of what? In the face of superior external forces. But only out of this castration, I come to be a member, if you like, proper member of the society, capable of answering the demands or expectations coming from the others. Okay? Otherwise, if I would unleash my id onto the society, I would be a very dangerous person. Okay? A very dangerous person with whom nobody wants to have any intercourse. Okay? So, in that regard, castration, later on we are going to talk about split, actually. This castration turns out to be an important component in the process of socialization, in the process of the development of the social individual. Actually, Freud will connect this with the problem of the development of civilization at the same time. Okay? It's through this castration, the processes which he terms as the sublimation, okay, turns out to be possible, and through sublimations we develop civilization. Sublimation meaning here the transference or projection, or the reformation. I'm trying to not to use any technical terms. The formation and reformulation of the original sexual energies into socially accepted ways. Okay? Just like these energies being translated into the fields of science, arts, etc., etc. And according to Freudian analysis, all civilization is the function of this process of, so to speak, castration anxiety. Okay? It's out of castration anxiety the individuals in the society do not unleash their sexual energies, which could be very dangerous for social relationships, and rather prefer or come to learn to transfer them into other fields, into the socially acceptable ways. Okay? And now this brings me to the discussion he developed with regard to the formation of the original society. The horde of brothers, he calls it. Okay. In Totem and Taboo, he first developed it, but throughout his life he stick to it. Okay, it's an interesting theory. Later on, its repercussions will be seen. For instance, in the discussions, we will see its repercussions in the discussions of a certain piece of writing by Claude Lévi-Strauss when he discusses the origin of kinship relationships. Okay. So it's that story, the original natural family. It starts with the discussion of the original natural family. Actually, you can see there is an analogy between this original natural human family and animal families. Okay, for instance, groups of lions or other animals where there is only one male, all the other members of the group being females, and even if there are males, they are youngsters. Okay. This means that in this original family, according to Freud, there was one single male having the privilege of having sexual intercourse with the female members of the group. Okay? All the other males, the sons of the original, are head male, okay, being restricted from having any sexual intercourse with any female members of the group. So what's at stake here is a kind of monopoly over the sexual intercourse in the group. Okay? Only I will have any sexual relationship with any member of the group, okay, regardless of whatever this is. All the rest would not have any kind of relationship. Now, for a time, especially when the boys or sons are young, you know, the situation can be bearable. Okay, out of the castration anxiety, they can limit their sexual drives and they can keep themselves in check. Okay, but after a certain period of maturity, you know, according to psychological theories, I don't know how it is in medicine, okay, but psychological theories must develop this in connection with the information data coming from medicine, so we can trust them. Sexual drives or sexuality awakens in the life course of a human being 2 times, okay? One, this earlier time, up until the age of 5, okay? Then it falls into a period of forgetfulness. There was a special term for this. What was it? I don't remember right now. Huh? Latency. Yeah, latency. Then it enters into a latency period where children are not aware of any sexual energies, existence of any sexual energies. But at the puberty, at the period of puberty, they again start afresh, okay, awaken. So these 2 periods are the periods when the children experiences the effects of their own sexual energies most, okay? So, later in life, I mean, so this second period, actually, later in life, it turns out to be increasingly difficult for the sons to abide by the restriction of sexual intercourse of the father. Okay? So they come together, according to Freud's narration. This is a hypothetical narration, don't forget. Okay? They come together and establish an agreement among themselves. You know, if you say that Freud is now speculating here, you should see speculation in the development of theory of social contract. Okay? Now they agree, they arrive at an agreement among each other as to kill their father. Okay? And finally, they get rid of their father by killing him. Okay? Now, what's at stake here? On the first place, a sense of guilt. Okay? A guilt shared by all of the members of the group, male members of the group. So it is this guilt actually which makes them real brothers. Okay? Not the simple blood ties, but what makes them real brothers is that, if you like, actually referring to certain religious connotations as well in this connection, this original guilt sets the possibility of the community of the equals. Why equals? Simply because they are having equal share in the crime for which they feel guilt. Okay? So, out of this guilt, this having partaken in the act of parricide, actually, okay, they decide not to allow anyone to replace the father. Okay? Not allowing anyone to replace the father is nothing else than a development of the first rule, as you can see. Okay? So what we will witness in later development is the increasing number of rules and regulations, which requires the development of a specific rule, first taboo, and within taboo, the incest taboo. The original taboo is, of course, the original guilt. That everybody really actually knows that they have committed a crime against their father. Okay? The original taboo is this. So the result of this is not to speak about it. Okay? Not to speak about it, not to talk about that original crime, not to mention the name of the father, etc. Okay? So that's why actually this follows in its symbolic sense in the constitution of the society. It was power. And now what we are witnessing is not the castration actually, total castration of power, but rather it is being divided into pieces and parcels. Now each and every one of the sons would turn out to be having their own families and making use of what has been remained or fell into their share out of this power. So in relation to their family, they still represent and fulfill the role of the father, but in relation to each other, they would turn out to be equals. Okay? So now the first original model is reproduced on a lesser level, while on a higher level a new model had been introduced. Okay? Now the original model was this: father, sons. Okay? Totally at the mercy of the power of the father. Now here, the new model is the community of the equals, brothers, now having related with their family after the example of the original model. But now the model of the society has been changed. The model of the society is the society of the brothers. Freud would call this the horde of brothers, or brothers' horde, where we witness the development of the regulations. Again, here, as you can see, development of the regulations represents the development of the civilization. Okay? Rules and regulations are actually nothing else than the sublimation of the original libidinal energy into another field. Now, why into another field? Simply because none of the sons in this new situation, none of the sons can claim sexual monopoly against the other. Okay? It means that their sexual libidos needs to be restricted. Okay? That they should confine themselves with a limited number of females. Okay? so that they are no longer free to have sexual intercourse with any female of their choice. Okay? So it is this restriction translating itself into form of law and therefore representing nothing else than the sublimation of the original sexual libido into another field. Okay? And rule-making is one of the first and perhaps most important steps in the way to civilization. So these community of brothers now this time are connected with each other through the rules and the regulations. And Freud discusses the development of incest taboo within this context as well. Okay. As you may know, the incest taboo in its larger sense refers to a restriction about having sexual intercourse with a female within the same group, belonging to the same group, okay? Whatever that group is, okay? We do not know exactly what family is, so let's use a rather ambiguous, vague term, okay? A social group. Okay, any exogamic group in that sense, a social group where incest taboo operates. Okay. You know, it says that you should not have intercourse with the female of your own group. Now the question is why? I guess we should leave its discussion to Levi-Strauss structural analysis. Okay, our time is up. Even though there may be several points that I'd like to share with you, I guess that's enough for today. Thank you.